Okay, so I've done this a couple of times. This sort of, guys who are very analytically inclined when it comes to fourth down decision making, just kind of go back and look at the results itself. We know the math works out, but did the results work out in certain cases? I did this with Brandon Staley, and the results worked out there. I did this with, Dan Campbell, who you don't think of as an analytics guy, but he went for the most fourth downs when you should out of anybody. Even if you exclude a garbage time. So it checked out with him. It helped his team. But now let's try John Harbaugh, right? Because we can all remember certain decisions that just, whether or not you like the decision, the result didn't work out. Well, let's use him. And I'm also going to include these, 2-point conversion tries at the end of games, even though analytics doesn't really tell you to go for it or not go for it. People throw it in with analytics, so I'm going to include it, even though I actually don't think that should count as analytics, because analytics don't tell you one way or the other. That's just a gut feel thing. But regardless, let's just get into it. So first things first, let's use this chart just to talk about this is how often teams go for it when they should in terms of percentages. Worth mentioning, the Ravens aren't that high up on the list. So the team that always gets criticized for this stuff, there's a lot of teams, and including some like old school head coaches who don't really have that mindset, who go for it more frequently when they should than the Ravens do, or at least did last year. Like Andy Reid, for example, I guess, he has a reputation of going for it a little bit, but also kind of an older school mindset. Well, he went for it more than John Harbaugh did. So worth throwing that in there. But anyways, let's just go to the results. And first thing, week 1, he had in really a decision backfire where he had one of his decisions cost his team 3 points against the Raiders. They would end up losing this football game. So they lost, 3 points. They lost in overtime to the Raiders, meaning this turned a win to a loss if we're just going results-based thinking, which again, not exactly how it works. Change one thing, the whole game changes. But for the point of the exercise, we're counting it as a win that now counts as a loss. The next week, we have the Chiefs, who the Chiefs, they ended up beating the Chiefs by 1 point, and there wasn't a decision that took points off the board or gave points to someone else, but there was a decision where they went for it on 4th and 1 with 1 minute and 5 seconds left in the fourth quarter to ice the game. Had a more traditional head coach been in that situation, they would have punted, which to me, I'm counting as a tie, because who knows if the Chiefs win or the Ravens win. That feels like a 50-50 scenario. So what I'm doing is I'm saying this turned a tie to a win. Meanwhile, against Minnesota, they went for it on 4th a number of times. Actually, 3 key drives happened because of fourth down conversions. One put 3 on the board, the others put 7 on the board, meaning this was a 17-point swing, his fourth down decision making, which resulted in an overtime win. So this is turning a loss to a win. Over here now, and worth mentioning, we're not talking about every single game, of course, because some games, there's actually a chunk of games that like no fourth down decision making happened there, because I don't factor in, like, if it's garbage time in an obvious situation where you should go for it, I don't factor that in. Basically, my mindset is, like, would Bruce Arians have gone for it there? And if the answer is no, then, that's the ones I factor in. But anyways, so for the Bears, a fourth down decision call gave the Ravens 3 points. The Ravens would, end up winning by 3. So that's a tie if they don't do that, because we don't know what happens in overtime or anything else. But now they win, so that turns a tie to a win. As for the Cleveland Browns, this game was one of the games that, actually, this is the only time a controversial decision, or at least, I don't know if you call it controversial or what, but this is the only time one of these decisions didn't actually impact the game itself, but it gave him 3 points, a little bit of a cushion in a 6-point win. And then the two that he got the most criticism for, the Steelers and the Packers, that's 2 1-point losses where they, lost the 1 point there. So again, I have to mention, this does not mean that it turned a win to a loss. I keep hearing people say, well, if they won those 2 games, they would have been into playoffs. We don't know if they would have won those games had they kicked the extra point. You can have opinions on those if you want to, but like one of those would mean that you're now playing the Green Bay Packers, where you have Tyler Huntley, your backup quarterback, in trying to beat the team that, ended up with, the number 1 seed in the NFC. But still, had a more traditional head coach been in those situations, this now means that instead of those 2, being just straight up losses, then this means that, one of them would have potentially been a win, one of them would have been a loss potentially in overtime if you consider it just a true coin flip. Although again, that's not exactly how it works. But, 2 ties, instead they drop 2 losses. So here's the final verdict. 18 net points were added through his decision making. It did cost 2 ties and a win, but it also added 2 ties and a win. So this whole John Harbaugh's fourth down decision making is what cost the Ravens the playoffs. It's just not true. There's this whole narrative of, well, if against the Steelers, they just kicked the extra point, went to overtime, and then went on to win in overtime, well, then they would have been in the playoffs. And that part is true. That's how that would have worked out. But at the same time, it's like, well, there's so many ifs there that you can't guarantee it. And again, what's more likely? You convert a 2-point conversion or you win in overtime? It's about 50-50. I mean, again, most models I've seen in the analytics department, they just say, it's a toss-up. Just go with game situation in that one because we don't have a strong opinion either way. That's basically everything I've seen. So I don't get why that gets thrown in with analytics because analytics have it as a toss-up. But regardless, I guess, John Harbaugh did it, so that's why people think it's analytics. The reality is, though, even with those 2 games not going the right way, which are very unique situations, it's rare that situation happens. But even though those 2 situations did exactly happen that way, still ended up being a push in terms of win-loss record, and it ended up being, still positive in terms of points added by John Harbaugh. So I say he should keep doing it, and don't let the people that don't understand it, get in your head. One thing I should mention, though, one thing that did bother me in one of those games is that I believe it was the Packers game. They were down 14, didn't go for 2 the first time, but did the second time. Go for it the first time. What are you doing? If you go for it the first time and you don't get it, well, now you can go for it again to try and tie it up and still send it to overtime. So that was stupid. But again, for whatever reason, no one complained about that. People only complained about the going for 2 at the end there, which is just one of those weird things. So, yeah, that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.